In this zone 6 to 7 climate, it is about that time of the year when the Japanese beetles begin to emerge from the soil and begin to devour plants. So what are the 4 plants that the Japanese beetles really go after in my garden? Do the Japanese beetles have any natural predators on the landscape? And what natural pest control methods can we as humans employ to control these Japanese beetles? So of course the Japanese beetle is an introduced species from Asia, like Japan, and because of that it can be very invasive, especially here in North America, because the natural predators, or its own native predators, many of them are still in Asia. So the adult female beetles will lay their eggs in the soil, especially in grassy areas, because when these eggs hatch, the beetle larvae will voraciously feed on grass roots, right? And so it can cause damage to a lot of lawns, damage to maybe some native grasses as well. And eventually that beetle larva will mature, it'll crawl up from the ground, fly to the nearest vegetation that it finds tasty, and it will skeletonize the leaves of a lot of different plants, reducing those plants' ability to photosynthesize effectively. And these Japanese beetles will feed on hundreds of different species of plants and trees, so it's a very wide range of botanical specimens. So the Japanese beetles are a type of scarab beetle, right? So they can look very similar to some other beetles out there as well, especially another beetle called the false Japanese beetle. It's also referred to as a sand chafer, since the larvae might feed on plants in sandy conditions, sandy environments. But the false Japanese beetles are going to be a little bit duller in color, not that bright and shiny. And then the false Japanese beetle will also lack the white dots near the base, the bottom of the beetle's abdomen. Also, given that it's really hard to find a lot of research, a lot of information on the false Japanese beetle, is probably a pretty good indication that it's not really a serious pest, not like the Japanese beetle. False Japanese beetle, or the sand chafer, might also be a native beetle. I'm not totally sure about that, but something to keep in mind, and maybe somewhere down the line we'll be able to reach a conclusion on that. So there are also other species of chafers. These will usually look a little bit different, lighter tan, red in color. They typically won't really have that green coloration or anything of that nature. They can also look similar to the oriental beetle, but the oriental beetle is more fully darker brown, more of like a chocolate brown, with like white and gray mottling on its back. But I believe all of these species in their larval form will feed on grass roots. So getting into my top 4 plants that the Japanese beetles will really go after in my garden. Number 1 is the evening primrose. Typically in my landscape, the evening primrose is one of the first plants that the Japanese beetles will seek out. Right, the evening primrose is also actually a native plant to North America. As the hollyhock is going into flower, which is a plant in the mallow family, the Japanese beetles will also seek out this plant, right? Eating the foliage, eating the flowers, and it can be a really challenging crop to grow for cut flowers, especially when you have a pretty substantial Japanese beetle challenge. I've also found the Japanese beetles to really hunt down wild grape. Now, they're not just limited to the wild grape. A lot of commercial vineyards and other farming operations that grow grapes generally have huge issues with Japanese beetles as well. So the wild grape, the cultivated grape, and also the somewhat related porcelain berry, which is an introduced ornamental plant, can all harbor and be a host of the adult Japanese beetles. Also, these Japanese beetles will go after a lot of rose plants, right? Especially the wild rose or the multiflora rose in various areas on the landscape. Now, up here, I've also added the gooseberry in a different color. Now, if I had made this video last year or the year before, this would probably be a list of 5 plants. But I want to kind of make this distinction that the Japanese beetles have not touched the gooseberry plants at all this season, which is kind of a surprise. Sometimes they'll feed on the fruit, they'll feed on the foliage. A lot of times. This year, I can't find a single Japanese beetle on them. And I haven't really done anything special to the gooseberries. So, you know, it might not be a prime food source for them. Evidently it's not. Maybe there are different environmental considerations, or maybe the grapes are just a bigger draw for the Japanese beetles. That is kind of yet to be determined. Next, we get into predators of Japanese beetle. What will eat the Japanese beetle? So we have a lot of animals on the landscape that will seek out that easy source, or that abundant source in some cases, of fat and protein, right? So a wide range of animals will consume the Japanese beetle larvae, like moles, mice, possum, skunk, squirrel, chipmunk, shrew, rats, and raccoons. And then we also have different species of birds that will also go after especially the larvae. So typically when I am out in the garden and I've prepared a new bed of soil and I'm not quite ready to plant, maybe it's the end of the early morning and it's starting to get really hot and sunny, so I go inside and take a break. Maybe I come back out you know, in the middle of the day or later on into the evening, and I will see robins and catbirds going over that bed that I had, you know, freshly like pulled grass out of and weeded. And those robins and catbirds will be looking through the soil to find, I'm sure, probably those Japanese beetle larvae. And I'm sure they're also looking for other insects and worms as well. We also have different insects that can attack or parasitize the Japanese beetle. So we have some generalist predators of insects, right? So we have like the assassin bug, and then we also have the spider, right, which is actually, you know, an arachnid, right? And then we'll also have the tachinid flies and ground beetles, right? And those are two other generalist predators. And what I mean by generalist predators, by the way, is that they eat a broad range of different insects, right? They're not going to be specialists, right? They're not going to only eat a certain insect from a certain species or a certain genus or anything like that. Some of the Typhia wasps and the Istocheta alderichi, which is a type of parasitoid fly, also will go after the Japanese beetles. However, I believe those two species are not native to America either, so some of them may or may not be able to establish themselves here in North America, and if they do, it could be good or it could create a new problem too. And then also the blue-winged wasp will also parasitize the Japanese beetle as well. In terms of parasitic nematodes, these are going to be nematodes that can infect and kill Japanese beetle larvae when they're in the soil developing. So we have some nematode species from Steinernema that can help with this, and then we also have the Heterohabitus bacteriophora. Now these predators can in fact go after and help to limit Japanese beetle populations, but that depends on how many of those predators or others that might not even be up here exist in your area, right? And what are the environmental conditions? Are they conducive to the survival of these different types of predators, or is there just not enough to maintain control over the Japanese beetle populations, right? Because some of these predators are native to North America and they won't always necessarily seek out specifically the Japanese beetle as a food source. It might just be more of a convenience or a happenstance because it's not necessarily recognized by them as a primary or legitimate food source always, right? So basically the environment could be out of balance, that is enhancing the Japanese beetle populations, and or the predators that are there are not actively going after the Japanese beetles as aggressively as they need to in order to maintain that ecological balance. Thus, in some situations, it may be important for humans to directly intervene. So in this sense, if you are a backyard gardener, the soap and water in a jar, manually going out there, removing the beetles, putting them in the jar, a lot of people have done that. And then another option is the pheromone traps. Now some people are really gung-ho about them, other people are not as enthusiastic. Sometimes, you know, you want to be careful because you don't want to do it wrong and attract more Japanese beetles into your area. So both the pheromone traps and the water in the jar method could be used. The pheromone traps might especially be useful if you have chickens, because chickens really do go after Japanese beetles in many cases extremely aggressively. Like, it is a sought after food source for them. Now, going back to the water in the jar method, I don't use soap when I collect. You know, the important thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you do kill the Japanese beetles if you're not using the soap, because that's what the soap will effectively do. Now, one option here might be, when we're talking on a small scale, if you put that jar in the fridge, they will go dormant in about 20 to 30 minutes, right, because of that cold temperature. And then you can actually heat them like on the stove or whatever, and that will kill them. Then you can compost them, because those exoskeletons of the Japanese beetles might be hugely valuable to soil life and plant health, because those exoskeletons might contain, I believe, chitin and chitosan. Well, those are two compounds that contain a nitrogen component, so it can be a slow-release nitrogen fertilizer, but they can also stimulate an immune response in the plant, right? A healthy immune response, right? One that's going to make the plants more resistant to fungal infections and other pest issues. And I don't want to like get disgusting here, but like you can then dry them up and grind them down into smaller pieces and then apply that to the soil. The other option is to potentially purchase maybe some of these insects or nematodes, right? Especially the parasitic nematodes. A lot of growers and agronomists will actually use these for pest control of various insect pests. But it's also important to encourage the ecology and to encourage the habitat that can support all these. This is kind of like your first line of defense. This is like the baseline, what should be in place at the beginning, right? What you should work to bring back into balance. And then from there, you can intervene directly, as need dictates. And then the other option, of course, is milky spore, right? And so this is actually a fungus that can infect and kill Japanese beetles, especially when they're in that larval stage, right? And so this is especially a larger scale option, right? Especially for farmers or growers. And then the other idea that I have up here is well, what about changing some of the cultural practices or environmental dynamics? And this is where, in this modern age, here in North America, we have so many lawns, right? And so this is going to be just perfect habitat for all these Japanese beetles to grow and develop in their larval stages. And this is where environmental fragmentation and continued urbanization of the land continues to increase this imbalance, right? And so it's just a perfect habitat for so many of these Japanese beetles, to such a point where a lot of these predators might not have as easy of a time catching up, especially if we're not supporting the environment for these predators. We talk about all the neonicotinoids, the small animal traps, the lack of available wild foods or native plants that used to be on the landscape but maybe are not anymore, or are not in as large numbers as they used to be, contributing to this imbalance. So maybe encouraging more efforts for reforestation, or turning a backyard into a garden or a natural area. So you basically just do what you can to your own capacity. So thank you so much for checking out this video on the Japanese beetles. Does the Japanese beetle have something to teach us about any imbalances in our landscapes as they are today? Of course, if you have any questions, comments, or experiences with the Japanese beetles in your garden or in your yard or otherwise your landscape, feel free to let us know down in the comments, and we can continue to work to educate each other as much as possible. I'm sure I have so many more things to learn about these Japanese beetles myself. So thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Take care.